But the Soviet Union gets a huge ally right off the bat. Remember I told you about China? China goes between tight and fragmented and tight and fragmented, and they have been fragmented for a very long time. So what are they looking for?
Somebody to help them out.
Yes, and so they get it. And if you remember, Japan invades Manchuria in 1931. So for 14 years, they are fighting World War II. So whatever government there was in China is just exhausted. So all they need to do is Moscow trains a guy named Mao Zedong, and he starts a revolution, and by 1949, China becomes communist. And if you're a communist in 1949, do you get to decide what you want to do as a Chinese government? You do what the Soviet Union wants you to do. And so that means that when we look at decolonization, it's not just that we have China, the Soviet Union, but we also have China. And then we have expansion. Expansion into Europe, that's what the Berlin Airlift was. They were going into Greece, trying to have the same thing happening in Greece. They were going into Afghanistan in the 40s. They were going into Korea. They were going into Vietnam. They're going basically every direction. The Korean and Vietnam Wars were examples of containment. 1949. This is Korea. The Chinese, but mostly the Soviets, were coming down, and as soon as the Allies left, they were going to take over the whole peninsula. Same time period, down here in China, in Southeast Asia, China was going into Vietnam. The difference here is that for Korea, the entire world, through the United Nations, stood up for containment. And that's what the Korean War was. This wasn't the United States war. This was the United States and England and France and a bunch of others, actually, fighting against the Soviet expansion, using Chinese folks and local Korean folks. And in the end, by 1953, we came up with an agreement. We said, this is where we'll draw the line. You'll have North Korea, we'll have South Korea, and here, this will be a democracy. They decide for themselves what they want. But we're going to keep a base, an American base there. And why is there a base there? To prevent North Korea from what? Invading. Now the thing is that in Vietnam, it was France only. And they were going against the opposite side, which was China and the Soviets and the North Vietnamese, who were their locals, right? And as soon as they came up to an agreement, which was right after Vietnam in 1954, what did France do? They got the heck out of there, which meant that South Vietnam was left by itself. And so, yes, they're a democracy with no experience whatsoever. They have all the problems of decolonization, and they've got this threat. They were begging people to help them. The United States says, well, we're in Korea, but we're not here. We don't have any tradition here. We don't have any design to be in here. We're not going to be in there. And so we said no, 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 until about 1961 when JFK sent some advisors in. By 1963, we had lots of advisors in there. And then when Lyndon Baines Johnson was president, in 1965, we sent in 600,000 troops. That's a police action. Our goal wasn't to take over North Vietnam or even to take over South Vietnam. It was to protect South Vietnam. South Vietnamese wanted us. They begged us to come there. Now what happened by 1971? 5 years later. 6 years later. We were in the Vietnam War in 65. In fact, it started in 49. Both of these countries, Soviets were expanding in both sides. The difference here is that in North Korea, our policy of containment never stopped. But in Vietnam, the France were gone, so the South was by itself for 10 years. What happens about 1971 is that the American public doesn't want to be in there anymore. And so we leave. We leave, we start pulling out in 71. By 73, we have hardly anyone there anymore. And it's not because we're being pushed out. We just don't want to be there. We don't want to be there supporting South Vietnamese. And so as soon as we're gone, we're gone. We have like maybe 100 people there, a couple hundred people tops, and they're just advisors. That's when North Vietnam, with Chinese officers and Soviet weapons, makes a large-scale invasion in 1975. And what happens? They take over South Vietnam, and then that's it. And what's worse is that 1 million people are killed in the process. Very bloody. So when the United States looks at this, we say, well, this was a failure. Well, it is in a way, but it's not in a way. We weren't pushed out. We never lost a single battle in Vietnam. But what we were hoping to is to preserve South Vietnam. Did we do that? No, we left before it was done. But we wanted to make sure that the price of expansion was higher than any benefit. Do you think China wants to expand elsewhere? They were real concerned about Japan. What would happen if China wanted to take over Japan? That would be a costly war. But what's the likelihood? We met them in Korea, we met them in Vietnam. Are they going to take over Japan? Are they going to try to take over Taiwan, which used to be a part of China? No. So in that sense, was it successful? The containment was successful globally, but not specifically.